Typically, quizzes part 1, deadline 5, September 18th. Exam 1, quizzes part 2, deadline 5, October 16th. Exam 2, quizzes part 3, November 13th. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, December 5th. And these are all end of day, 11:59 p.m. of that day. So basically September 19th, quizzes part 1, no longer available, etc., blah, blah, blah. For the final, that's December 11th at noon, and at that point it becomes de-availabilized. For the paper, draft deadline, if you want to do one, is November 16th. And print out a copy, bring it to me, mark it up, put a grade on it, get it back to you. You can do as many drafts as you want. You can either get the grades you want, or you can take the process, just like no more drafts, or time runs out.
Oh, so we can hand you a draft and we'll grade it and we revise it again. Give you the grade it again. You receive that grade?
Yes. Yeah. Oh. So you can keep doing as many drafts as you want, and I'll put a grade on it so you know what
to expect.
What your grade is at that point. If you want to get the +5 bonus, upload the final version of the paper to Blackboard by November 18th. If you want to get just full credit, upload it by November 25th. If you want half credit, by December 4th. And the half credit is there basically as a desperation thing. So years ago when I first started teaching, someone said, I have the paper again, can I just turn in something and get some credit? I'm trying to graduate. I'm like, sure. And so it became a policy. And it's totally possible to pass even at 50%. Not a great strategy, but not the worst strategy. What we'll do today is go over the paper. So that way you'll know, exactly how to do the paper, what to expect, how to do it, all that good stuff. Now, the deadline stuff it just explains. There's a draft due date, and the draft due date is basically just, if you want to do well in the class, maybe you should have a draft done by then. If you don't feel like it, no big deal. Draft deadline is last time to turn in the draft, as I mentioned. And again, you can do drafts ahead of that time, as many as you want, until either get what you want, time runs out, or you get sick of it. There's also the on-time bonus deadline, +5 there, the emergency deadline, and 50% deadline. For turning the paper in, again with the drafts, it's print a copy, get it to me. You can either drop it off in class, or I've got a drop envelope from my office. I'll pick it up, I check whenever it comes to my office, or I can go by my office hours. If I'm there, it takes about 15 minutes to go through it. If you drop it off at the end of the day, and I have no more office hours, I'll get it back to you the next office hours or next class. And I'll just carry it around with me, unless you ask me to leave it in the drop envelope, in which case I'll leave it in the pickup envelope so you can pick up the draft. For grade discussions, paper grading has a degree. I've got detailed rubrics, as people like to say, but of course paper grading is somewhat subjective. It's not like a math problem where it's like, here's a definite answer, the answer is 42. With a paper, there's a degree of, subjectivity. So if you believe that the grade on the paper is not the grade you deserve, the thing to do is just print up a copy of paper, come in during my office hours, and tell me why the paper is better than I thought it was. And this is a no-risk scenario. I do know some evil professors who will just start taking out points because they don't want to see you, and they're like, me, if I keep taking out points, this person will go away. But I don't do that. You come in with an 83, the worst that could happen is you depart after visiting Tucker Hall once again with an 83. The only possible exception would be if there was like a TV drama style confession of plagiarism. I killed my roommate and I plagiarized the paper type of deal. But that has not happened yet. Maybe in the movie, that might be someday. Yeah, so the grade discussion thing is, again, no risk, but not guaranteed. You basically have to show what it is in the paper that I missed the first time through. Plagiarism, we'll talk more plagiarism. Plagiarism is bad, doubly bad in ethics. Now, typically the way plagiarism works is someone, the deadlines roll around, someone says, crap, I haven't got my paper done, Wikipedia, or essays.com, save me. And then, it goes, first it just copies it, pastes it, goes in. Now, to warn everybody, all the papers go through SafeAssign, and it gives a report on the plagiarism stuff. It checks the web, it checks all the turned in papers, it gives me a report. Now, if you see like a number come up and it's like there's a number there bigger than 0, and you said, why'd that happen? I wrote my paper myself. Why is there this like 20% or 30%? Well, the answer is that SafeAssign is pretty aggressive. So what it may be flagging may be perfectly fine. It may be that you have similar wording to someone else, or it's just kind of close. And so I actually do go in and look. So someone may have what seems like a 50% match, but the paper is all totally fine because everything is like quoted and it's just kind of like something else. But sometimes I do find like 100% matches and it's clearly from a site. And the way I handle that is basically this. Person knows what they did, I know what they did, 0 goes on there, and that's that. I don't take it personally, I don't engage in reprisals or dislike the person or think any less of them. I just put down a big 0 and done is done. Oh, interestingly, in case you're wondering, the most plagiarized paper is on cheating in classes, for real. I guess it's that people have a sense of irony. So how do you pick what to write about in the paper? Well, essentially it's an issue/case paper. And the idea is to pick a issue. Now, philosophically, an issue is not like a psychological issue. If someone likes to dress up like a possum, skateboard around Tallahassee, hitting people with a plastic lightsaber, referring to themselves as Darth Possumus, that's a variety of psychological issues. But we're not dealing with that. That's for the, that's PSY as opposed to PHI. We don't handle that kind of stuff. An issue in philosophy is a point of dispute or disagreement with 2 or more possible sides. And so, put simply, point of dispute, where you can argue one side or the other, and there may be other sides. It's not just always just 2 sides. There can be like lots of sides. So mission number 1 is gotta find a subject and gotta find an issue. So how do you do this? Well, one way to do it is if you go onto the on Blackboard, go into the paper folder, and in there is a case file. Not like a cool case file like on the X-Files or like CSI, but a bunch of ethics cases. And they include such things as, well, classics like, the ethics of lying, the capital punishment, cheating in relationships, cheating in academics, as well as more recent stuff such as stem cell research, etc. And all of those are sort of like pre-made standard ethics cases. But suppose you gaze upon them and you're like, all that stuff kind of bores me. I want to do something else. Well, fortunately, pretty much anything can be made into a moral issue. Maybe not like a particularly exciting moral issue, but it could be made into a moral issue. The main challenge, though, is making sure that it's moral and not just like an issue or just like a report or something. How do you test it? Well, one key thing is to ask yourself, is the word moral or ethic or right or wrong in there? Because sometimes I got in papers. For example, I've got a paper on deciduous trees. Learned a lot about deciduous trees, but the word ethics and morality was not in there at all. It's just like a report on trees. I've read papers on parenting techniques, just from some parenting thing, nothing to do with ethics. So if you're picking your own issue, the one thing I do request is that you either like through an email or like in class or in office hours say, I'm writing on this. Is that an ethical issue? And I'll either say, yep, or I'll say, no, but here's how it could be. Now, the easiest way to make it a moral issue is just take whether fill in the blank is good or bad, right or wrong. And you can take just about anything. To easily prove this, someone come up with a subject that doesn't seem to have anything to do with ethics, and I'll make it into a moral topic, or try. Anything. The weather. Okay, so you get the subject of weather. Now we can turn that into a moral topic. One would be, we can link it into climate change, for example. We could say, is it moral for people to engage in behavior that can affect the climate, thus affect the weather, thus bring about harm to other people? You can also bring in other stuff about the weather. It could be something along the lines of, do people who report the weather, how obligated are they to make sure the reports are accurate and up to date? Or, or to use like a movie thing, suppose there is an extreme weather event coming, like I guess we can consider meteors to be part of weather, if we really stretch it. Should people be told about this climatic event that can kill everybody, even if there's nothing we can do? So even the weather could be made into, or another example would be, take California with the drought. One issue would be the weather there. That could tie into issues of such things as the ethics of watering one's lawn during a drought. Yeah, so anything can be made into ethical stuff. Anything else? Any other thing there to emphasize?
Can you give another example?
An ethical thing? Well, here would be some current ethical issues that are sort of like big in the headlines today. If you're into technology stuff, one thing is what are called autonomous weapons. Elon Musk, he's the guy that, the Tesla guy, electric cars that are super expensive, and the SpaceX stuff, he has his own, he's got to be a supervillain, because he's got his own rockets, One day it's going to come down to someone fighting Elon Musk on a volcano. That's how it's going to go down. But Elon Musk and others, such as Stephen Hawking, have expressed concerns that the development of autonomous weapons, AI, will kill us all. And so one important moral issue would be whether the development of autonomous weapons is morally acceptable or not. And when people argue about this, one argument is, of course, the Skynet, Terminator 1. If we build these autonomous weapons, they'll go all Matrix, Terminator, Skynet on us and kill us all. And so one good moral reason not to do that is because they will kill us all. And I guess that would be bad. They've also argued that if we build autonomous weapons, they'll become like really cheap. So picture like a drone, cheap drone carrying a cheap bomb, or like a shotgun. And their concern is, Elon Musk's concern, others' concern, is they'll become so cheap, all the terrorists and dime store warlords and dictators will have them. And so that would be a bad consequence. So it would be wrong. Another current example would be immigration. If you follow the news, pretty much every day there's a new terrible story about, they find like a sunken boat, people have drowned trying to get from, Greece to another part of Europe, or from Africa to another part of Europe. They recently found a truck with 71 dead people in it who are trying to get, fleeing from Syria. And so one contemporary moral problem would be countries like France, Germany, the United States, who are well off and stable, do have an obligation to take in people from places like Syria, places that are, in warfare. And then there are other people who are fleeing not from warfare, but from lack of economic opportunity. People come from Mexico to get jobs in the US. And so there'd be, a couple more issues there. Are we obligated to bring in people who are fleeing war zones? How morally are we obligated to let in people who are, fleeing, say, economic, difficulty to come to the United States? So immigration is a moral issue. And of course, there's also, to make like one that's more, I guess, somewhat more personal, kind of a minor one, is it morally acceptable to post pictures of people on Facebook and tag them without their permission? Which is kind of a small thing, but it's still a moral issue.
You get sued. You get sued.
Maybe. Unless you're an artist, then you do whatever you want. Well, almost anything. Yeah, so those would be some examples of moral issues. Now, if you're looking for one thing to do is the news. You turn on the news, they'll bring you something, happening, and you can say whether that, this, or that. I mean, other quick examples would be things like equal pay for women, always a perennial one, morally acceptable or unacceptable. Also, going back to the one from the weather, California has imposed water limitations on people. Morally, are people obligated to cut back on water during droughts to help other people? And if you're interested in like social justice, the issues of like one that gets in the headlines a lot is policing as revenue stream. The idea is not policing to maintain order, but to bring in money for, you know, towns and counties, and, you know, basically to generate revenue. Is it acceptable to like arrest people, you fine and ticket them just to make money as opposed to maintaining order? It's all kinds of issues. Now, once you get your issue, you decide your position on the issue. Now, you need a definitive position. The position would be, yes, it's acceptable, or no, it's not. And you may have like a more, I guess, complicated position. You might say something may be acceptable, but only under certain conditions, or may be unacceptable only under certain conditions as well. For example, to give an example of that, the one that's got in the news because of the undercover tapes of Planned Parenthood is the moral issue of abortion, you know, a classic moral issue. And so someone's, you know, we often think of it as being a straightforward, you know, you're pro-choice or pro-life, but there's actually, you know, a huge range. So someone may say abortion is acceptable under certain conditions, like up to a certain, like viability, for example. Or someone may take the view it's never acceptable, or always acceptable. So that is to give your position. Now the next step is a bit tougher. So once you've decided what your issue is, what your position is, the next thing is to kind of brainstorm reasons. Ask yourself, why should someone else accept my position as being correct, or being true? And you can put down as many as you know, a whole bunch, kind of like the brainstorm thing, like here are all the reasons, and then kind of do kind of like a, you know, reality show on them. You know, winnow out the ones that are not so good, and then pick what you think are your best ones.
Back to the position on the issue. Earlier, I think the class before you mentioned that we had to pick a side, right? Like we can't be in the middle, like, so that's what you were saying?
Yep.
So yes or no for abortion?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, you could have, it doesn't have to be like an extreme position. You don't have to be like abortion anytime no matter what, or abortion never no matter what. You can have a position that is, you know, I guess, sophisticated position, but you have to take a definite stance. Because some people will sometimes say, well, it could be good, or it could be bad, or people may think different things about it. And I don't mean so much that you have to take like an absolute, you know, absolutely wrong or absolutely right, but you have to take a definite position.
Okay.
Because sometimes what people try to do is they try to say, they're thinking of compare-contrast papers, like, you know, you could say this is right, but you may say this is also right, and not take a stance. Now, after considering the reasons why you're right, the last thing to do is consider objections. What would a reasonable person say in response if they were reasonably trying to argue against you? So this part is kind of the, you know, initial brainstorming setup. So figure out your issue, what your position is, and then why you're right, and then some reasons why someone might object against your view, why someone may think your position is mistaken. Now, once you've kind of done that stuff, then of course the next stage is actually writing out the stuff. Now for convenience, bless you, in terms of writing and grading, the paper is broken into 4 parts. When you do the paper, be sure to label those parts, mainly because when I grade it, I go through and grade it by what the part's supposed to do, and that way I know like where to put the point stuff. So there's introduction, argument, objection, reply, and conclusion. Now, doing the introduction is pretty straightforward. Should be an easy 5 points out of 100. And it should be, in terms of the length, 125 words, about a half a page or less. You could actually do it in a few sentences. And since the introduction is not worth a whole bunch, there's really no reason to go on and on and on in the introduction. You should make it, you know, get the job done, concise as possible, because if you're just like writing more and more and more, then you're basically doing a lot of work for nothing. So it should be in there. Well, basically the following stuff. The thesis, the case statement, your position statement, your argument statement, and a little background to set it up. For example, a person might say, I am addressing the moral issue of whether or not autonomous weapons should be banned. It is my position that these weapons should be banned, and I will prove this by showing that because they can be developed cheaply and proliferate, this would result in a great deal of harm when these weapons fall into the hands of terrorists, warlords, and dictators. I will consider objections against my view in favor of autonomous weapons and then reply to those. Autonomous weapons, of course, have been made famous in science fiction movies such as Terminator, and also in the real world to the development of such things as drones. There are numerous people who are opposed to, these weapons, famous people such as Elon Musk, and I have decided to join their ranks and argue against them. And that would do all the stuff. I know what the thesis is, what you're writing about, the position, what, a brief statement of how you're going to argue, and then a little background to set the stage. And so it can all be done in a few sentences. Now, all this is also in the paper guide. So if you go get the PDF paper guide, it's got all this stuff in great detail there. So that's the introduction, and it's graded by basically I gaze upon it and I look to see if are the 5 things there. If they are, 5 for 5. If not, less than 5. Now, with your introduction, you can copy that and then paste that into your conclusion. We'll see in just a bit how that will work. Before pressing on, though, to the argument section, anything about the intro that needs more intro stuff? Now, the argument part is worth 50 points. Should be 1,000 words plus, court rule, and show the following contents. The first part is the case information, and that's worth about 10 points. That's where you present, whatever background, setup, etc., or stage setting that you need. Now, depending on what you're writing about, you'll need more or less case information. If you're doing something that is well known, well understood, common knowledge, you don't need a lot of case information. For example, if someone is writing about cheating in relationships and committed relationships, there doesn't be a lot of setup for that because we all know what that is, and you just sort of say, I'm writing about cheating in committed relationships, and you might just say what you're focusing on. You might say I'm looking at married couples, or you might say I'm looking at any relationship that is gotten serious to some degree of commitment, but it would be fairly short because even though a lot can be said about cheating and what percentage of people cheat and how people cheat, etc., there's really not a lot of background that people need. Everyone pretty much gets what cheating is, and so you don't need to lay out a lot of background. And since it's only worth 10 points, you don't want to put like pages and pages into the background. So what if you're doing something that, say, is a little more unusual? A typical, sort of the test is, imagine you're writing for a typical, person. What would sort of the hypothetical average person, know about? And someone like cheating and lying, they pretty much know about that. Now, if you're doing something more unusual, say like the ethics of stem cell research or fetal tissue research, or the ethics of the development of artificial intelligence, you may want to put in more background. Now, in terms of getting kind of the guide to this, here's a couple approaches. One approach is basically ask yourself, okay, if I was reading this paper and didn't know this stuff, would this be enough information for me? But of course, that's not a great guide because we are our own worst editors, because we obviously know what we're writing about, so we already know. The second thing to do is have someone else look at it. That someone else could be me. And I would say, yep, that's enough, or too much, or too little. Another option is you can look at good, well-written editorials. The type of stuff that occurs in places like The Atlantic or New York Times or other reputable-ish websites, and look at like an argument of essay they present. And what they'll do is they'll set up, you know, the details of the case, so you know what's being talked about, but then they go into the actual editorializing. Now be sure to look for an editorial, you know, where they're actually arguing, as opposed to like a news report, because the news report will be all info, as opposed to editorializing. Now again, probably the most definitive way to do it is have me look at it. You do a draft and I'll say, yep, nope, more, or less. But in general, since it's only worth 10 points again, generally less is better than more. And again, depending on what you pick, you may need more or less stuff. The majority of it, 40 points, is arguing for your position. Now, as I mentioned, what you'd probably do here is kind of, you know, brainstorm about it. Ask yourself, what reasons do I have that I could give to someone, you know, and connect together with logic to show them that this is true? And then pick the ones that are the most effective. Now, we haven't talked about arguments yet. Next time we meet, we'll get into talking about like what an argument is, technically speaking. But what you want to do is try to build an effective argument. An effective argument, what it does is, well, basically there's two things. We'll see this more later. The evidence you're presenting is plausible, hopefully true. And the reasoning used to put that all together is good reasoning. And if you've had like a philosophy class or logic class before, this is all old news. If you haven't, then starting on Monday, we'll get into what that's all about. So I'm working from the assumption that the assumption is that no one has done philosophy or arguing before. It's all totally new. So you'll get all the stuff that you need. If you've done it before, you're already ahead of the game. So the idea is basically, in regards to arguing, is trying to prove your point. Everything in here, in the argument section, should be aimed at establishing that your position is correct, that you are right. Now, when building the arguments, one thing that people often do, a common mistake, is just have a whole bunch of little like micro arguments. But it's, to use a crappy analogy, I always use the crappy analogy of a bridge. Now, people build bridges, they don't build a bridge and then stick, typically, you know, 600 or 700 sticks under them, because that would just be kind of, you know, ridiculous. What they do is they support them typically with a few really strong things built, because we know that it's better to have a few really strong things supporting something than a whole bunch of really weak things. Or to use like a meal analogy, everyone's probably noticed that generally you feel better if you eat like a real meal with like a cup, maybe like the main thing, some vegetables, etc., than just eating like a whole bunch of like little snack things. And it works kind of the same way. By analogy, it's better to have a few well-developed arguments than a whole bunch of little micro arguments. And we'll go over, starting Monday, what I mean by arguments and how to do that stuff. Now, the next part is the objection and reply. It's worth 40 points, and it should be 500 plus words, and needs to contain the following stuff. First, you need to raise, to meet like the minimum requirement, you have to raise at least one significant, reasonable, moral objection against your position. Essentially, you're arguing against yourself. And a good question might be, why would I do that? Why would I argue against myself? Well, there are some good practical reasons. One is, of course, is from the standpoint of like learning stuff, it's good practice to, whenever you're assessing like a plan, be it, or like something you're arguing for, be it in philosophy or a business plan or a life decision, it's always a really good thing to ask yourself, could I be wrong about this? And what would be some argument against what I want to do or think I'm doing or think is right? Because that way, by reflecting on it, you get to assess it a bit better. So from a practical standpoint, it's good to be sort of in the habit of raising critical objections against your own views and positions. Because for a practical reason is, you're more likely to make better decisions, better choices. To always ask yourself, could I be wrong? The second thing is that, somewhat paradoxically, you can make a stronger case for your position by arguing against objections. Now, part of this is psychological, because if people see that you're considering the objections they raise, they'd say, aha, this person's thought about these objections, and they're replying to them. They must know their stuff. Also, as another practical point connected here, one thing that if you follow like political disasters at all, one sort of lesson from all things is it's always better to consider problems up front when you've got control of the situation, because then you're handling the objection. For example, to use the current one, consider Hillary Clinton and the email server of doom. And that came out, and what she's trying to do basically is play catch up with that problem. And that generally doesn't go well, as she's finding. And so as a practical thing, it's always good to consider like problems ahead of time, especially if you know that people are pretty well aware of those problems. Also, of course, it's useful for learning about other positions, to consider, sort of learn the tendency to think, other people may disagree with me for good reasons. I may still believe they're wrong, but I can accept that other people can disagree for rational reasons and not because they're like idiots or evil. So there's some very good practical and philosophical reasons to consider objections. Now, we get into the actual, what you do here. The idea is this: raise at least one substantial, significant, reasonable, moral objection against your position, an argument as to why your position is incorrect. So if you're arguing that something is morally okay, you would bring up an argument as to why it would be morally not okay. For example, suppose I'm doing the paper on autonomous weapons, and I argue that, these weapons get in the hand of terrorists, blah, 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 they're bad. Then one objection I might consider is this. Now, if these autonomous weapons are fairly, cheap, one moral argument in their favor is, if they're cheap and effective, we could replace our really expensive, weapons with cheaper weapons. And what that could mean is we'd have more money for things like education, healthcare, etc. And so you could say one moral argument in favor of cheap autonomous weapons is, if they are very effective and get the job done, if you can replace like, $1 billion aircraft bomber with, let's say, $1 million worth of drones, that's a huge savings. And in theory, though, that money could be used for something else. Maybe more weapons, but perhaps things like, social programs, education, lowering the deficit, etc. You can also argue in favor of autonomous weapons. Another moral, argument in favor of them would be that, well, if you send out, drones and they get shot up, well, who cries when the drones die? Who has to go to their funeral? Nobody. They don't have any family, sadly. They have no friends. And so if, a robot drone gets shot down, it doesn't hurt it. It, assuming it's not intelligent, it has no feelings. And it's not related to anybody, so no one feels bad. No one dies. And so if you have war with people, less people dying, that would be good. Less death. Now the next part, once you raise the objection or objections, is a reply or replies. And the idea is essentially to counter the objection. So essentially it's, here's my position, here's why I'm right, here's a reasonable objection against my view, or objections, why I could be wrong, but here's why these objections are mistaken. So I might counter the objection about, one standard one again is, when drones go out and they die, no one cries, because we don't have emotional attachments to them. Now, one way to counter that would be, well, it's good that no one dies in the battle, but here's where it becomes a problem. One that keeps us, in a way, sort of, not really ironically, one that keeps us from going to war all the time is that when you send people to die, that has a huge cost. And so, in many cases, countries don't go to war because they know the cost they have to pay, politically, etc. But if you can just send drones there's no political cost, would be much more likely to engage in war. Problem occurs, send out the drones. No one's going to cry. And so it could result in much more warfare. And of course the drones will probably be killing actual people, so that would actually result in more death. So then you could say, like in regards to the cost, you could say, well, yeah, true, if drones were cheaper, they might spend the money on social programs, but what's more likely is they'd probably just buy more weapons. It's like, cool, we can get $1 billion worth of destruction for $1 million. Let's spend $1 billion and get a whole bunch of destruction. And those would be replies to those objections. Now again, you want to make, this might seem kind of odd, but you want to make the objection as good an argument as possible. Now, someone might say, well, what if I think my objection is better than my real argument? Well, in that case, what you just want to do is just switch your position and make your previous argument into the objection and change your view. Because if your objection is better than your argument, then you should probably reverse them. And then when you reply to it, of course, you want to make the reply effective. So again, the pattern is basically, in the argument, here's your position, here's arguments as to why you're correct. Then you go to the objection, and you consider at least one significant argument, moral argument, against yourself, why the opposing view could be correct. And then you respond back to that by saying, this is why it's mistaken. And if you want to see a lot of examples of these, I've got a crappy blog, 2 blogs. I do a lot of writing on ethics and stuff, and my usual style of writing is not surprisingly like that. If I'm arguing about something, I'll say, here's my argument for it, but here's an objection, and here's how to reply to it. And so if you want to see lots of examples about those, I do include a sample paper, of course, but like I said, I've got 2,200 blog entries. Most of them are made into books, but I will not ask you to look at my books, because that would be, you're awful. No. Yeah. But if you're looking for examples of moral reasoning, those blog posts are pretty clear examples of argue, objection, reply type of stuff. Yeah, because I drink my own Kool-Aid, basically.
Is that on Blackboard?
No, but if you search my name with, actually the one blog is called Talking Philosophy. It's a British site, and the other one is the brilliantly named A Philosopher's Blog. Got them into original, I know all about their marketing. So how do you tell when you like a good one or a bad one of these? Well, the baseline, of course, is, the sea level. That gets the job done. To use a crappy food analogy, this is like a basic salad or ham sandwich. Not exceptional, but, fills you up and is, kind of basically nutritious. So this is essentially adequate. You present the case information, the issue, your position. There's a basic arguments that are relevant, they at least connect to the issue. There is a adequate, reasonable objection, a reasonable counter, and the writing is coherent. It's just average across the board. It achieves the minimal requirements for getting the job done. Again, to use my crap analogy, decent ham sandwich or salad. Now, what if you want to move up into the better stuff? Well, the difference is not so much, that, because people often think, well, if I just put in more stuff, it'll be better. That an A is just a, C with more stuff. But of course, getting from a C to an A is not a matter of quantity, but quality. To use an example, if you have a Big Mac on your tray, and you put 10 more Big Macs, it doesn't make it into a 5-star restaurant. More Big Macs doesn't make it 5-star. And so, likewise with paper, just more adequate stuff will make it good. So what is the difference? Well, mostly it's a matter of what people like to call the intangibles, the quality stuff. So what it does basically is this. It's a matter of it being not just adequate, not just getting the job done, but doing it in an exceptional way. Being very clear, very concise. The arguments are not only just adequate, they get the job done, they're relevant, but they're very effective. that they're very well developed, that the paper is very coherent and put together well, everything, the impact of each argument is clearly shown, and the objection is extremely challenging, and the reply to it, is equally effective at overcoming it. And so it does all things that it's supposed to do with a level of excellence. Clear, well organized, well presented, well developed arguments, they're very effective. And again, this is the difference between, say, getting like a decent salad or a decent sandwich, and this would be like, 5-star dining. So it's not just like more of the same, it's put together better. Now, suppose someone wants to, for whatever reason, head down and explore the depths. The D level is, basically it's got some problems. It's not like fatally flawed, but it's basically, low quality. It's not adequate in its presentation. It's got arguments, but they're kind of poor or weak or not well connected. Maybe some fallacies. The objection is kind of lame, maybe not particularly relevant. There's a counter-argument present, but it's not particularly good. The organization is off. The paper may be incomplete in places, and it's got some major flaws. Nothing fatal, but fairly major. To use an analogy, it's like the pizza after about 5 days in the fridge. It's not going to kill you, but it's kind of lost some of that goodness. It's starting to taste like whatever else is in the fridge. It's getting kind of dry and so forth. It's not yet toxic, but not very good. Or it's like getting your dinner from a vending machine. It's not going to kill you probably, but not that good. Now, what about a failing one? Well, this is like really bad. It's got very poor arguments, doesn't include an objection, or a counter argument, or it's just catastrophically bad. Organization is really bad, it's missing parts, major flaws, just wicked bad. Now, there are points for doing stuff. So they're actually, boringly enough or interesting enough, the F range is actually kind of the biggest, because this is basically like 0 to 59%, which is pretty big range. And so there are points. So there's like 0 would be doing nothing, a 59 would be just really, really close to being really awful, but almost close to being not super awful. So those are the rubrics for grading. So essentially the way it's graded on, you notice that nowhere in here is that I agree with the position being argued for, or that you embrace the one true view. So I don't grade it based on, did you find the right moral answer? So you don't go and like try to research what I think about stuff and then write on that and think that's going to affect the grade. I've had people take positions I agree with, and they get bad grades because their papers are awful. And people take positions I totally disagree with, but they get good grades because their paper is well done. So basically it's a matter of the quality of the presentation and writing and clarity. Although it's not an English class, so that's not the primary thing. But obviously if the paper is bad written, bad grammar, bad organization, it will be hard to tell the quality of the rest of it. But primarily it comes down to the quality of the writing and primarily the quality of the reasoning. How good are the arguments? And we'll see starting on Monday how you make a good or bad argument. Before pressing on to the last bits, anything about these bits? They need more stuff. Now here are some common mistakes that are grading killers. First, writing a report. So someone just say, I've had people turn reports on, say, on abortion. They say, here's what abortion is, here's, what people say about it, here's what people said about Planned Parenthood, here's what people pro-life say, here's what people pro-choice say. And I mean, abortion is a moral issue, but a report on, say, what's happening with Planned Parenthood today is just a report, which can be fine for like a class of journalism, but it's not an argumentative essay. Second common mistake is a compare and contrast paper. Compare and contrast, of course, is taking the two, say that something's right or wrong, and just comparing the different positions. So someone might say, for example, let's take a pro capital punishment, view, and compare that to a anti-capital punishment view. And that could be an interesting, compare and contrast paper, but it's not suitable for like an English class, but not a moral argument paper, because there's no arguments. Thirdly, a very common thing is assertions without arguments. What a person will do is say a bunch of stuff, and then to say something like, capital punishment is wrong, it's really bad, it's wrong. Or they might say, helping other people in need is good, because it's nice. But there's no arguments. And we'll see again on Monday what arguments are, and what it would look like to have one or not have one. A fourth common mistake, which is, I guess if there's going to be a mistake, would be the least bad, is to argue for something, but not have it be a moral argument. For example, one perennially favored topic is legalizing marijuana. And people often give like economic arguments or legal arguments. And those can all be good arguments. Like, for example, people will say, well, if we legalize marijuana, that will result in taxes, that will result in a lot more income, which could be true. But generating more income is an economic argument, not a moral argument.